We have a great panel today to help us answer some of these questions. First, Jessica Livingston. Jessica started in investment banking and then was a co-founder of Y Combinator and has written a book, several books, I think, but the one that I read, Founders at Work. And Paul Graham, the other co-founder of Y Combinator, made one of the best decisions in his life when he proposed to marry Jessica, so they're husband and wife. Next to Jessica, Naval Ravikant. Naval is the founder of AngelList. I'm sure you all know about AngelList. But he's also an entrepreneur before that. He co-founded several companies before that. Genoa, ePinions. You probably have heard of ePinions. And he's also an author. Co-author of Venture Hacks. And next to Naval, Heidi Roizen, a longtime friend. Heidi is also an entrepreneur and founder. She co-founded TeaMaker back in the PC era. And she was a venture capitalist at SoftBank, one of the hottest venture capital firms at the time, and is now at Draper Fisher Jurvetson. And she's also a lecturer at Stanford. So, very accomplished panel. So the way we run this, this session is for you. So there are two mics here, and we want you to come up and ask questions throughout. So I'm going to start with some questions to get it going, but at any point, come up to the mic, I'll recognize you and you can ask your question. Typically, over half of this session is questions from the audience. So start thinking about your questions, line up at the mic, and we'll get as many as we can. I'll start with a few questions here. So Jessica, Y Combinator, it's the first and largest incubator ever. How many companies apply to Y Combinator now, and how many do you accept? Oh, you have to.
Can you hear me? Okay. Lately, like the last application process we had for the summer batch, I think we got about 2,500 applications, and this summer's batch is 52 startups.
52 out of
2,500. Yeah.
So that's like 2%.
It's pretty low.
Oh. Cool. That's harder than Harvard to get into Y Combinator. Probably better too. But how do you decide which companies to accept?
Well, we have 10-minute interviews, so it's a big challenge to choose the startups. And for those of you who don't know, we conduct the interviews back-to-back all day long, and then we contact the founders that night to say whether we'd like to fund them or not. So they find out that very day. So in the 10 minutes, what do? We have 3 different tracks of Y Combinator partners doing the interviews. So I'm in a room with Paul and Robert and Trevor, the original founders, and they're all technical. I'm not technical. So I let them sort of evaluate the technology and evaluate whether the founders are good at programming, which is very hard to tell, but you can sometimes base it on what they've built, if they've built something already, or if they've, in their application, have built something in the past. We take a long look at that, in the application process. What I am looking at specifically in interviews, I sort of block out all the other stuff, and I'm looking at the co-founder dynamic and sort of the personalities of the founders. Have they thought deeply about what their startup idea, what the area that it's in? Do they seem excited about it, believe it or not? Do they get along? Are they interrupting each other? That's a bad sign. Different things like that. It's sort of hard to describe. And then literally after the 10 minutes, the 4 of us say, okay, should we fund them or not? And sometimes it's very clear and we all say absolutely because we're excited about the idea and the people. Sometimes we have to talk about it for a few minutes, but it's never more than a few minutes.
So in 10 minutes, you can decide whether this is a company you're going to invest in or not.
Yeah, it seems pretty crazy, and sometimes we're wrong. But when we first started Y Combinator in 2005, we had half an hour interviews. Of course, we were only interviewing 25 startups at that point, but we realized that we really did have a sense after the first few minutes, and a lot of the time was wasted. So we make it 10 minutes so we can talk to more groups.
Cool. So Heidi, you're in the venture capital business and you fund companies. How do you decide who to fund and who not to fund?
Well, a lot of the work gets done before we ever meet face to face, because I think for every venture capital firm, there are areas that we are knowledgeable in, and there are areas we're not knowledgeable in, and it doesn't make a lot of sense for us to try to make an investment in an area that we don't know anything about. And I think that's pretty true of most venture firms. They'll pick practice areas that they're interested in. We look at a lot of deals that come in. We get together every Monday, the partners, and we discuss things that we've seen or things we've heard about. Obviously we're batting things around on email a lot. If you think about when we're in a partner meeting collectively, among us, we sit on close to 100 boards. So it's a very interesting group of people, because we're in there with about 100 company data points in real time in our heads, presuming we're paying attention to the companies we're actually already invested in, which isn't always true of all VCs, but we have a lot of data points. And so part of looking at funding, and by the way, I was an entrepreneur. I spent 6 months on the road my first time out trying to raise money. No one would fund us. We self-funded, we bootstrapped, and we funded in my very most favorite way to be funded way, which is not represented by any of us up here, which is we actually got customers to buy our product. It's this really cool way to get funding because it's non-dilutive, and you learn something, and it validates your business proposition. So it's cool at many levels, and that's how we did it. And so we only raised our first round 6 years after we started the company, and we were already about $4 million in revenue and profitable when we did, which really changes your dynamics in terms of what you can negotiate with. So I give you all that to say I've been on your side of the table, and I've been on my side of the table. I've been on both sides of the table, and it is a relatively random process. So if you're sitting there thinking, this sounds ridiculous, how could you possibly make a decision in 10 minutes, which I completely agree. We do the same thing. How could you read a one-pager and know whether you're going to invest or not? I don't know. It's a pretty crazy system, but that's how the vast majority of the venture capitalists I know do it. It's a lot about gut and feel and pattern recognition and pattern and sensing something about the team and the mission they're on. And it's very hard to articulate, which is why also venture is very much a small team business. It's also why you'll take 50 meetings and you'll get 50 different answers. And when you ask VCs for feedback, you'll get diametrically opposed views, and that doesn't matter. You just go out and kiss a bunch of frogs, and eventually you will find one. I think if you believe in your idea and you've got a good idea, you will find one. But it is a lengthy process, and don't think that the people on the other side of the table from you have some magic thing. And I'll just close by saying this. I know some VCs who have tried over time to quantify this, right? They've tried to apply. In fact, I know this big initiative going on that one person's doing who's super smart and is trying to do this thing about, if you have these degrees from these places and you worked at these places, and and in fact, like if you dropped out before you finished, because that's the current lore, is it's better to drop out from Harvard or Stanford than it is to actually finish in any one of those places. So he's actually trying to sort of do this analysis and say, can I figure out which ones are going to be the best based on analysis? And just so far, every one of those initiatives has largely failed. So it really is all about reading, being able to get your point across well enough that you intrigue someone enough to take that first meeting. It's not about getting all the way to the finish line. It's about intriguing us enough so we'll take the meeting, and then it's about knowing how to make that 10 minutes really count.
Right. We have questions in the audience. Let's start here.
Hi, this is a great panel. I was recently at a meeting of VCs where I met somebody who sort of criticized the idea of all these different, startup incubators coming up. And he thought, well, they're forced into basically a 3-month program, and at the end of the time, they have to show that they're on this hockey stick sort of, curve in terms of the revenue, and if they don't do it, then, that's it. You don't really get anywhere. So his criticism was that, these incubators force businesses to sort of develop a certain way, and he didn't think that was good. So I was wondering what your thoughts are on and the whole idea of all these different incubators coming up in general.
Assume that's for me. Well, when we started Y Combinator, I can promise you we did not expect there to be so many people doing what we do. So I don't know. I don't really have a comment on if it's good or bad. But in terms of our startups, over this 3-month period, we're working very closely with them to help prepare them for demo day, which is when there's a room filled with investors, 400 investors, to come and see their 2.5-minute pitches. And again, the goal is to just create an interest and hopefully get a meeting. And we think that that's a great idea because it's such an efficient way for investors to spend a couple hours of their time and see 40, 50 companies at once. It's great if there's a hockey stick curve. It's great if after 3 months you have this major growth rate because investors love that. But it's certainly not true for everyone, and it's certainly not true that every single startup raises tons of money right after demo day. I mean, some of them raise Series A, some of them raise a few $100,000 and get back to working on the product, and then six months to a year later, we'll help them go out and they'll raise another raise funding then.
So do you think having all these incubators is a good thing?
So the accelerators are there, and I actually don't like calling them incubators, so I'm just going to switch the terminology if someone doesn't mind, because they're not really incubating little eggs and hatching them. I just find that's like a demeaning nomenclature. The accelerators serve 3 incredibly important functions, just like schools do, just like MIT does or Harvard does. One is they filter, so they help go through all the noise and say, these are the people worth looking at before they might have a product or before they might have traction. So that 10-minute interview that Jessica and Paul and Robert and Trevor do, people pay enormous amounts of money for the output from those 10-minute interviews. So that's a very important function. The second thing that the accelerators do is they do the education function. And part of that might be, look, here's how you raise money. That's kind of an obvious question people are going to ask. And the third thing they do is they build an incredible alumni network that pools resources, educates the entrepreneurs, unionizes their power a little bit, and standardizes things that they might have had to do one-off or ad hoc. So these are very valuable functions, and without them, without the accelerators today, I don't think the angels could function. There'd be too many deals out there to look at, and they wouldn't know what to look at and what not to. And without the angels out there, I don't think the VCs could function. The VCs are using the angels for signals, and the angels are using the accelerators for signals. So, like it or not, they're a part of the ecosystem that's here to stay. But just like there's lots of angels and there are good ones and bad ones, and just like there are lots of VCs and there's successful ones and failed ones, there are lots of accelerators, and there's the cream of the crop and there's the not so good. So they're an important part of the infrastructure that's not going away. I would say that today probably half of the companies that we feature on AngelList have come through some accelerator or another. And we count that signal in as to which accelerator they came from and who they got associated from that accelerator and what kind of financing they did afterwards as an input signal. Everyone in this business is looking at tons of noise and trying to extract signals. And it is through that pattern matching. And to the point earlier, you cannot systematize that. You can't automate it because think about the combinatorics of human DNA, right? There's 6 billion, 7 billion people on this planet. No two are even vaguely similar if you get to know them. And companies at this stage are just combinations of individuals, so they're even more unique. So you need all these human filters who are constantly quickly assessing everyone to figure out who gets to make it to the next stage. Like it or not, that's the way it works.
I want to add one thing because I've heard that same thing. If you tell people that they have to solve a problem with 3 months and $50,000, you're only going to solve easy problems. Is the complaint. And number one, I'm a huge fan of accelerators and of angel financing because I think that they do fill, yes, there are problems you can actually solve in 3 months with $50,000, but there are also problems you can kind of take your first whack at it with 3 months and $50,000 and show progression, even if it's not user metrics because you don't get there. At the other end of the spectrum, there are things like I know Singularity U is trying to mount something where they're trying to solve really big problems. They're trying to stake out the area where they say we're actually going to be the accelerator that solves really big problems that take a long time. The problem with really big problems that take a long time is the funding mechanisms of both, I think, accelerators and angel investors. They're not life cycle financing for really big problems, which is why you have a whole food chain of people, including venture capitalists and including all the way up through investment bankers and ultimately the public markets, which there are periods of time where public markets actually allow non-profitable companies to go to go public, which is another way of getting funding. So I think there's that whole food chain there. But I think you have to know, and this is a really important thing for everybody, not just for Accelerator or Angels or whatever. You have to know what you're trying to do and what kind of financing is appropriate for you. Because you can bang your head against the wall all day going to people who are just the wrong people to fund you. And people often will take meetings, especially if you got something interesting, because they like to get educated. And you do not want to spend all your time educating the population. So it's important to understand that. And I do want to say there's a really great book about it is about venture financing, but it also is, it also covers the other areas by these two guys, Brad Feld and Jason Mendelson, who are partners at Foundry Group, and it's called Venture Deals, How to Be Smarter Than Your Venture Capitalist or something like that. And it actually does a really nice job laying out the landscape of sort of financing and how financing works, which I think is super critical. If you're going to take money from anyone, you should kind of know what the whole end-to-end life cycle looks like for outside capital.
Okay,
Great.
we have
Thank
to
you.
move on to the next question.
All right. My name's Jake. I'm from Fargo, North Dakota. Fargo's a lot different than California. So,
I
I
was on the board of Great Plains for 5 years, so I've been to Fargo many
and you know
many
Doug
times.
then, I suppose. So we only have one venture capitalist group in all of North Dakota that I know of, I believe, and they're in Fargo. When I was 20, I started a company, did mobile development all the way through 23 now, still doing that. But I've seen that we did it one of those unique ways where we didn't raise money. We just built a company that sold stuff and made money. And one of the things I did realize, though, is I always thought, venture capital's a bad idea, this is a bad idea. But I realized that there are problems that we'd like to solve that are bigger than what we have for resources. And so in Fargo, those guys are doing some of that. But how do we kind of inspire the idea of venture capitalism, or there's some angel, but it's totally different than out here. How do we bring that to Fargo? And if not that right now, how can people who are where we're at work with you guys to build something great?
Well, first, you got to make a lot of money, get rich, and then spend it in North Dakota.
Working on it.
Or you need to make so much money that your neighbors get jealous and then want to invest in startups, right? That's kind of how it works. So if you look at Estonia, it's a small country that punches outside of its weight in the startup industry because they had Skype there nearby. And so they have a lot of ex-Skype people who are investing into the ecosystem, and they have accelerators, and they have angel financing, they have venture financing, and all of a sudden you have all these cool companies coming out of this tiny little country in the Baltics. So I think it's just success begets success. The world is flattening a little bit. It's not flattening as much or as quickly as we would like. AngelList, we can be helpful, but frankly, the bar is higher if you're outside of Silicon Valley or New York. You got to show a lot more traction. It's a rare venture capitalist that's going to get on a plane to fly to North Dakota. I always thought capital was liquid. It turns
If he was
out,
smart, he would go there.
Yeah, I always thought, look, by the way, North Dakota is having its own venture capital boom. It's just around energy and shale. But I always thought capital is very liquid. It turns out capital is liquid, capitalists are not, right? So capitalists don't like to get on planes, and they don't have to. They're rich by definition. So you got to get in a plane, you got to come here, you got to open a satellite office, you got to network a little bit, you got to use every resource at your disposal, including AngelList, including YC, including whatever you can get to. I would say 10 years ago, it was nearly impossible, with the occasional exception, to raise money outside of Silicon Valley. That's changing. So now it's probably about half the activity in Silicon Valley, and maybe half is spread out over the rest of the world. So that's a lot better than it used to be, and that's thanks to the internet, that great equalizer that brings us all here today.
Great, thank you. Next question.
Hi, my name is Billy, and I have a question for all of you, especially to Jessica. I watched videos of you in YC Combinator last year where you talk all about the Pokemon monster for the startups.
Pokemon?
Yeah, the monster for the
Do you
startup.
mean my talk on what goes wrong?
No, you talk about the only challenge for the startup in the YC class last year.
Yep. Mino monsters?
Yeah, so it doesn't matter. So,
Sorry.
so my question is for you is one of the challenges for the only people who want to start up here is that a lot of us are on H-1B visa, and I know a lot of talent people. They are very highly motivated, but because of the constraint of the startup visa, they cannot go out and start their own company. So I want to know, how do the startup community in Silicon Valley deal with this, and how much of the progress we are making? And if we cannot make any progress in the short term, do you have any advice for anyone on a H-1B visa but want to go out there and start their own company?
So just so I make sure I understand your question, it has to do with immigration rules here
Yes.
and how hard it is to come here and start a startup. I know a lot of people care very much about this
Yes,
topic.
and how do we make progress on this? And
Well, people are, I promise you, not me particularly, even though I worry about it a lot because a lot of the people we fund are from other countries. But I know that a lot of heavy hitters in Silicon Valley are spending a lot of time trying to make changes with the visas and that sort of thing. What I've noticed from the people we funded, they can come do Y Combinator for 3 months, but it's very difficult because they'll have to fly back like right before demo day, and they might not get back into the country. And I know it's very difficult and challenging.
I'm talking
for them.
about the people who in Silicon Valley or residing in U.S. here.
Okay,
But are still on H-1B because of the H-1B visa constraint. They cannot go out there and start
they
their own
can't start
company.
a startup because you're on an H-1B.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe try to get a different visa, an O1.
No, there are other ways to do it.
There are other ways. I mean, honestly, I'm probably not the best person to give advice on that. I would talk to either other people who have started startups and have gotten different visas or an immigration lawyer.
So Steve Case, the founder of AOL, is working on this. Ron Conway is working on it. Google is working on it. We're trying really hard to solve this problem, but it's not an easy one. It's going to take a little time. But believe me, people are working hard.
One way to stay in the country is get accepted into a PhD program somewhere. And then as long as, I'm serious. Get accepted into a PhD
My
program.
other point would be apply for Startup Chile and get $40,000. They give you the visa on top of it.
Oh, if you want to go to Chile, that's great.
Thank you.
Okay, next question.
Okay, it struck me as funny what you said about the dropping out of school. What are your views towards education? I mean, if I were a 10-year-old boy who wanted to be an entrepreneur when I'm an adult, what do you think I should be learning to become an entrepreneur? What would be a university program to become an entrepreneur?
I mean, first of all, there is education is changing, and the role of education, higher education. I mean, there's massive stuff on that, and I won't go into it except to say, you know, I'm the parent of one college-age student and one person applying to college, and I'm still strongly encouraging them to go to college and get their degrees. And I teach at Stanford, where I strongly encourage people to get their degrees because, for better or worse, first of all, Stanford has a pretty good filter, and so many of the things that apply, you know, talking about accelerators, talk about going to a higher institution of education like Stanford. And also, I believe, you know, the degree is it is a driver's license, and it is a minimum criterion for certain things and for certain places, and it helps you, right? And I have a few degrees from there, and it helped me. So you know, stay in school, kids, if you can, right? But, you know, a little bit of the problem is some of the very smartest people I know, you know, school isn't for everybody, and, you know, and the lore is, you know, you look around, and Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, and I mean, the list, there is quite a few people like that, but, you know, there are a couple people who win the lottery every year, too, and that doesn't mean that's a good strategy for you. So, you know, I think that there are so many programs and there are so many universities now that understand that entrepreneurship, and when we say entrepreneurship, that doesn't even just mean founding companies. It also means being an entrepreneur within an environment, going to work for a startup, understanding that. That's what I teach. I teach entrepreneurship, but I really teach more. It's almost like a psychology class. So I think you can go do that. I think there are many programs, there are many undergraduate and graduate institutions where you can almost do your entire startup working on the startup and take classes. And, you know, you take your marketing class, and you take your channel class, and you take your you know, your financial modeling class, and you just use them all to work on your startup. And so you can almost get a degree kind of incidentally. So I think those things can happen. I would encourage you to do that. But I think there's a tremendous amount of material that's also available online, and particularly as it relates to the business side of being an entrepreneur. There's a lot of material. Again, Brad Feld has written, you know, he's been prolific about doing books and being a great source of material. So if you go to feld.com and kind of poke around, you can find other ways without having to pay the expensive tuition. You know, Stanford has some really, I'd encourage you to look at some of the Stanford, particularly the Stanford MOOCs that are going on this summer, because they're all free. So,
Heidi, this question came up last year, and Paul Buchheit answered the question. He answered it this way: the best training for doing a startup is to work at a startup. So Paul worked at Google, so he picked a good startup to work with because there were only just a few people there. But truly, that is the best training for starting a company, is to work at a startup.
Yeah, this is a riff on that. I think asking if you should go to college or not. I mean, it's highly contextual. Don't go to the University of Phoenix and end up in debt. Do go to Stanford if you get the chance, right? So it does depend on your opportunity cost, who you are, where you are, what you want out of life, and how much it's going to cost you. That said, I would say if you want to be in this business, learn technology. Best case, get a CS degree, double E, mechanical engineering, math, something like that. If not, worst case, go to Code Academy, spend 12 weeks, bury your head, go to Block, go to Code Monk, just learn to code, learn design, learn the rudimentary parts of it. It's a little silly to be in the business of technology without understanding the technology. And the tools are all there. So.
Great, next question.
Having a successful startup is really hard, and you guys are in the business of funding startups. The success rate is very low. After a few good exits, what makes you stay in the game, and what makes you think you'll have another great exit?
I think to get in the game in the first place, you have to be fundamentally broken at some level. And so I don't think success fixes that.
I don't know if I'm fundamentally broken, but I'm maybe a little crazy. I love working with the founders. I mean, every single day is different, and it's just so exciting to be part of their journey, and especially when you start with them so early on, when they get rejected over and over and have so many problems that they face and they overcome them. It's exhilarating.
So you guys would... Oh.
I just, as an older member of the venture community, I think that there are no higher highs and no lower lows than being an entrepreneur. And I will never be more proud of anything than the work I did when I was an entrepreneur. But that's a lifestyle that burns you out, right? And I did it for 14 years. And so at the end of that, I said, I really love this stuff, but it's like being a parent and then deciding maybe it'd be easier to be a grandparent. You can kind of hand them back when the diaper needs changing or whatever. So I think that for venture, and I know a lot of people that enjoy venture, they love the thrill of the entrepreneur and being with entrepreneurs and doing fun, interesting things. But they don't, in all honesty, they just don't want to work as hard, and they don't necessarily have that passionate spark to be intensely driven to do one thing. And so they go into this line of work, and this line of work's pretty fun because you get to be on the sidelines and be helping, but you aren't necessarily the one who's having both those high highs and those low lows.
The other thing is, as an entrepreneur, you can only do one thing. Your head's down on one idea. When you're an investor, you can invest in 10 different companies and sort of live vicariously through them and help them. So most of the investors that I know do it because they love it. They don't really do it for the money. They do it because they love it, and they love to help build companies and build people and do great things. And they make money along the way too, but it's not the driving force. Ask Ron Conway about that. He stopped working for money about 40 years ago. He does not need any more money. But no one works harder than he does because he just loves what he does. And most investors are like that.
Thanks.
Hello, my name is Keylor. I'm from Costa Rica. Well, down there we have a lot of smart people, a lot of great ideas, but sadly, we don't have a culture of investment and like startup accelerator or something like that. So I wanted to ask if you have like options, or do you offer possibilities to companies from outside of the United States? And also if there are any regulations or something that might stop investors from this country to give money to companies in other countries.
It's a super hard problem. I mean, there's no regulation. I mean, there are regulatory issues, but that's just one of many, many, many issues. Probably the biggest one is just at a very early stage, investing is a people business. And so you don't know the people, you don't know the network, you don't know the culture, you don't even know what you don't know. So it's very difficult to invest in an early stage startup that's overseas. We at AngelList, we do a little bit of overseas matching. In fact, that's where I think we add the most value, but generally those companies need to have a fair bit of traction because that's what it takes to pull a remote investor. And even then it's pretty rare and difficult. So surprisingly to me, the way that most international companies get funded these days is they actually move to here, which seems backwards. But yeah, they're accelerators that do nothing but cream skim and import from entire countries. And it's a very valuable service, but that's what they do. Like UpWest does it from Israel, and StartMate does it from Australia, and there's a Korean one, Japanese one, and so on.
Seed Camp.
Yeah, exactly, Seed Camp from Europe. So it's expanding, it's getting better, but the good news is the great liberator here is the internet. Every year that goes by, online transactions get a little bit easier, the knowledge gets a little bit more distributed, remote working and collaboration gets a little bit further, and companies that were trapped geographically in one area can suddenly address markets in another area thanks to the internet. So I think it is improving, but it's going to be a long cycle. It's not an overnight thing. I'm a little pessimistic in that I actually think the internet will solve the problem before the politicians do, right? I think the internet will get there before the visas do. But.
Great. Next question.
Hi, my name is Marcos. I'm from Brazil, but it has been 3 months that I'm living in Canada. And there we are working on an idea. And we have the prototype, we have the landing page, we have a great team, but we can't afford the launching for many reasons. So the question is, what's next?
Great. What do you need to see to fund a company? So you've got the product, you've got the team, you've got...
We just can't afford the launching for many reasons. So what's next?
Is it hardware or software?
Software. But the servers, we need servers and everything. We can't afford it, if people start to use it. So how can we get funds before launching the product?
I mean, the obvious thing is just launch it anyway. Come on, what, $250 Heroku server or AWS? Just get something up there. At least then you can start talking to investors and accelerators and people who might be able to help you to the next step. And there are accelerators in Canada. You can apply to YC from there as well and maybe get down here for an interview. Drive cross country if you had to, or what was it, Brian Chesky, sell cereal if you have to.
Cereal boxes. Just sorry to interrupt you, Naval, but you brought this up, and it's sort of a funny story. But certainly, you could apply to Y Combinator. If you can't do that, I've seen lots of variations on how to bootstrap. I mean, if you can't charge customers, the story from Airbnb is that they were destitute. They could not pay for anything, and they were designers from RISD. So it was around the presidential campaign here, and they thought, okay, let's design these kooky cereal boxes. And they had Captain McCain cereal that was Captain Crunch. I don't. Hopefully you know what that is, and Obama O's. That were a take on Cheerios, and they said, gosh, let's see, we'll make them a limited edition and sell them for $40 each. And they made thousands and thousands of dollars, and that's not only how they paid their rent, but they actually wound up eating the cereal when they couldn't afford to go grocery shopping.
The other answer is the natural progression of funding is your first money comes from friends and family.
Okay.
So the first $10,000 or the first $50,000 comes from friends and family. And that gets you far enough to get it launched. And then your second money comes from angels, former entrepreneurs or angel investors or that kind of thing. And it's only after that that VCs will actually get involved and give you even more money. So start there.
But I'm gonna jump in on that. First of all, don't take any money from people who cannot afford to lose it. Because as much as you love it and as much as your parents love you or whatever, if people give you money that they can't afford to lose and you lose it, I just think it's a bad way to live. So number one, that. Number two, there's only, it's funny, I with all due respect to what you just said, you're not technical, right? My undergraduate degree was in creative writing. So there is a future in technology, even for people who don't code. I did code. Nobody would want to buy my code, but all you guys who code and women who code, you need people like us to do all that other stuff you don't want to do. So there's a future even for those of us who don't. But even though
Yeah, to clarify, my point was you should understand the technology. I don't write the code for AngelList, but I at least know a little bit of what's going on.
Yeah, well, and I know, and after this many years in this business, I know a little bit about it too. So, but I will say this. I am not a technologist, but I know some really simple math about companies and ownership, and there's only ever 100%. It never changes. You can't change it. You can make the 100%, you can make the percentages worth more, but you can't create more. So be very careful about taking money on by selling equity. If you do that, you are diluting your company, you are setting up expectations, you are putting people in a situation of needing you to get liquidity so that they sell the company or take it public or whatever, and they have limited time frames on what they're going to do with how long they're going to wait to get that money. So I just say that to say, try to think about raising money and imagining that none of our categories existed, right? And before our categories existed, because even venture is a relatively new thing, it certainly wasn't around 100 years ago. People made money these kinds of ways. They did consulting. They did other products. They worked on nights and weekends. They stole from their employers. I'm not recommending that. I'm just saying, there's all sorts of ways that people get companies off the ground. And unfortunately, I think what's happened, and particularly here in Silicon Valley, I think it's one of the downsides of being here with all the positive things, is everybody thinks the first thing you do here is you get money from other people and you sell equity to do it. And I would argue that's actually not the greatest way to start a company. And I would look at all these other ways to do it.
Okay, we have 4 minutes left.
Email me. You can guess my email.
Okay, thank you.
We have 4 minutes left, so we're going to go into the lightning round. That means you ask the question like 15 seconds, and we answer in about 30 seconds. Go ahead.
All right, so my question is for Jessica and Y Combinator. I know last year you announced that you would be accepting applicants from people who didn't even have an idea for a startup yet. Was that successful? What are you looking for in people who have no idea, and what have you learned from the process?
Yeah, that was called the No Idea track, and we thought there's a lot of smart, talented people out there. We should let them apply even if they don't have an idea, and we can help them. It wasn't the best experiment, to be honest. But that said, we funded a lot of people who we didn't like the idea that they applied with, and we've worked with them, and they have new ideas. So, we'll continue to fund people without ideas, I think.
Awesome.
Thank
Next.
you.
Okay. I'm Victor. I'm from Ghana. Jessica mentioned earlier that only 2% of the people that apply get taken at Y Combinator. And you also mentioned that a lot of people you fund are from other countries, from outside the United States, okay? And Naval, mentioned that, it's difficult for you to actually fund people who are not based, in America. I come from Africa. The problem is the other way around. You have a lot of people who have ideas or who do not have money. Here you have the money, but you don't have the ideas.
You need to ask a question.
Don't you think there's something wrong with the funding model here? Don't you think you probably need to scale it beyond the shores of America? Because there are people there who do not have the expertise but have the money. They want to know how to invest. I've been on both sides of the table myself. I've lost money, and I've also been an entrepreneur. So what we do not have there is knowledge. Don't you think that model should be scaled beyond the US?
Yes. I think it should. But I think the point is, if we don't do it, it's because our model is working here. And I would argue that there are actually a fair number of ideas here. And part of the reason is because all of you are here in this room. So just look around the room and understand you all did something to get here. So this model is working for this. But I think the model needs to be more distributed, and it will over time, and people will change that. You got to find the right people to change it.
Think of it as an ecosystem. People are funding the animals within the ecosystem to find the things to eat. If the ecosystem isn't there, you can't fund the animals. You can't fund the fish in the desert. So we got to build. We have to build the ecosystem too, and that takes time.
Thanks. Next question.
Hi. So in regards to what you had said about equity, what would you recommend to give up for investments instead of an equity? If you were put in a situation between giving up equity or being put in a perpetual royalty, which would you believe is more beneficial to a company?
Never sign up for anything that's perpetual, that doesn't have an end. So, things that I think you can consider doing, for example, do a white label version of the product for a customer that is going to let them exploit it all they want, but don't give them rights to future development and don't give them rights to resell it to other people. One of the things we did early on to bootstrap our company is we realized that we could handle 2-byte code. I know this is really ancient history, I'm sorry, back in the 80s, CPM day, anybody remember that? And our biggest competitor could not, so even though they were much bigger than we were, we went over to Taiwan, Japan, Korea, we went places where 2-byte code mattered, and we did basically like countrywide site licenses, because we could sell to one OEM and we could bring in a couple $100,000 and that could fund the company. And we said, what are the chances we're actually going to get over to Korea in any near term and be selling direct to consumers? It was like 0. So, but everything should have an end, because someday you're going to want to sell your whole company and you need to be able to own the rights to the core of what you're doing. Because I've also seen developers do this where they'll say, fund me and I'll give you a 10% royalty for the rest of my life on the product, and they create unfundable companies.
All right, last question right here in the red shirt.
Hi, my name is Gilad. I'm from New York. So you mentioned about college dropouts. So I'm working with 2 lovely ladies who are professors from New York, and they passed the 40s. So what do you think about age and startups in that correlation? Because so far it's targeting, the 20 years old.
So age, does that matter?
Yeah. 2 co-founders in their 50s, no dropouts,
neither young nor
professors.
old. No, everybody, I mean, there can be brilliant people who are young. There can be, if anything, I think the problem around here is everybody thinks if you're too old, you must not have anything good you can do. I think that there are some generational differences, and age doesn't matter. Age doesn't matter to me at all. It's about what you know how to do.
They are not as agile, they cannot move. They have other responsibilities. But okay.
I would give up every bit of success, perceived or actual, for 5 years back.
All right, I'm sorry we have to end. We're out of time, but thank you all very much for coming.